thank you for this introduction and for allowing us to present our work. So I will be joined by Nawal and Pauline to present you a structured approach developed by ANSES to assess and rank the risk posed by biological and chemical hazard in food. Next slide, please. Next. So in 2016, ANSES was asked to rank biological and chemical hazard in order to optimize food safety in France. And the ranking methodology and its application as a proof of concept on a limited number of hazard and pairs were developed in the so-called CMAP3 referral. And the prior ranking tool follows this report to extend this proof of concept to all relevant biological and chemical hazards and food hazard pairs. The prior tool is being developed in several stages. The first stage is to build a database containing all the data needed to compile the ranking criteria, then input the data into the database. The third stage consists to classify food hazard pairs by food sector into excluded, potential, or relevant for ranking. Then input the ranking criteria for relevant hazard and food hazard pairs. And finally, develop a user interface. So the general methodology developed in CMAP3 is based on a multi-criteria decision support model. The first step is to identify the object to be classified, first for biological and chemical hazards. If characterization data are available and if the hazard is relevant in the French situation, the hazard is selected. Then selected hazards are combined with the foods to obtain pairs which are excluded if there is sufficient knowledge and data to conclude that the hazard is not present in the food, and they are relevant if there are data on the significant presence of the hazard in the food. Next comes a stage of defining and inputting the ranking criteria to finally obtain the classification of chemical hazard on one hand and biological hazard on the other hand, using the elect-free methodology. And the relevant pairs are ranked using the same methodology. Next, please. So I'm now going to explain you the methodology used to select biological hazard and food biological pairs for ranking. So from an extended list of biological hazard, we selected those that satisfy the hazard screening criteria, which are food transmission, adequate data availability, and relevance to the French situation. This gives us a list with the selected hazard with associated ranking criteria, which are the annual incidence, years of life lost, and year of life disability. And the result is the ranking of biological hazards. So the selection process began with a list of 344 pathogens refined in 121 foodborne pathogens, and finally reduced to 35 relevant hazards after applying a filter such as regulation, ANSES hazard treats, GGHP, or EFSA opinions. And here is the list of the 35 selected biological hazards and their associated disease. Next, please. So selected hazards are then associated with foods, and if there is evidence of significant presence of the hazard in the food, the couple is relevant. And the ranking criteria used for these relevant pairs are the YLL, the YLD, and the incidence of the disease attributed to the food. And the result is a ranking of food hazard pairs. Next, please. And to select the relevant pairs, the data is first researched in the European regulation and the French national instruction, then in the French foodborne outbreak database, or in the EFSA One Health zoonosis reports. And if no data is found in the previous sources, justified expert opinion are used. Now it's your turn.
Thank you, Marie. And now I will talk to you about chemical hazards. So the first step involves selecting chemical hazards based on the existence of a toxicological reference value, the TRV, the existence of contamination or exposure data, and for authorized substances, those for which the risk could not be excluded. For these selected hazards, we documented criteria such as the severity scale for each substance, the endocrine disruption potential, and the percentage of consumers exceeding the TRV to obtain a ranking of chemical hazards. So based on this first step, this is the list of the 108 hazards group that were selected and classified as relevant for the ranking. And as you can notice, most of the chemical contaminants or families of substances are covered by this list, by this selection. The second step of this method consisted of selecting food hazard pairs. The approach involved combining the selected hazards, so the list of the 108 hazards, with the EFSA Foodex nomenclature, which is the European food nomenclature, and then selecting among these pairs those for which there was an evidence of detection of the substance in the food. If this information was available, the pairs could be ranked and classified as relevant using the same criteria as the hazards, plus an additional criterion, which is the percentage of contribution of the food to the total exposure to the substance. If this information was not available, the pairs were classified as potential and were not ranked. For the search for evidence of detection of the substance in the food, we prioritized information sources. First, we used the French data from the total diet studies, the French total diet studies, or the ANSES contamination databases, followed by the rapid alert system for food and feed, and the French scientific literature. If no French data were available, we searched for European data, including EFSA opinions, European total diet studies, the RASFF, or the EU literature data. And finally, if no French or European data were not available, we looked at non-European total diet studies or international publication. The specific case of food contact material was also addressed with an additional condition. For a pair to be classified as potential, the hazard had to be present in the packaging, and the packaging had to be in contact with the food. Any other combination is excluded. And then, to classify the pair as relevant, the same approach was applied to search for evidence of detection. Regarding the prioritization criteria, we adopted two different approaches for the two types of hazards. For chemical hazards, an ascending approach is used, meaning from the hazard to the observed effect. The criteria are the percentage of consumers exceeding the toxicological reference value using information from the total diet studies, the severity assessed using a severity scale based on a decision tree, and the substance endocrine disruption potential of the substance using different classification, such as the European classification or the deduct classification. For the prioritization of food chemical hazard pairs, we add to the previous criteria the percentage of consumers, the percentage of contribution to of the food to the total exposure of the substance using the assessment of the estimation from the total diet studies. And all these criteria are documented for the different age groups of the population. And now I give the floor to Pauline, who will explain in more detail the criteria for biological hazards. Thank you.
Thank you, Nawal. Next slide, please. Okay, for the biological hazards, so we have also criteria related to occurrence and a criteria related to the severity. For the criteria related to occurrence is correspond to the incidence of the foodborne disease in France, and it is documented by French surveillance data. For the severity, you use the two components of the DALI, the YLL, which correspond to the mortality, and the YLD, which correspond to the morbidity. And to inform this criteria, we use publication study on the burden of foodborne disease, a publication in Europe and the work of WHO. Concerning the food biological hazard pairs, the severity criteria are the same, YLL and YLD, and the occurrence correspond to the incidence of illness attributed to the food. So to calculate these criteria, we have different parameters corresponding to the bottom-up approach. So we use data related to the prevalence of the contamination of the hazard at the distribution stage, information about the growth potential during conservation, the impact and the final preparation. Also, we use consumption data and data related to the infectious dose. For this, for the food biological hazard, this incidence is calculated for a defined high-risk scenario, which corresponds to the scenario responsible for the highest number of cases. And so we have to also to estimate the probability of the high-risk scenario. Next slide. Okay, after filling the health criteria, the next step is to aggregate these criteria and to obtain a final ranking of hazard and food. For now, we have separate ranking for chemicals and biological hazard. Next slide. So the aggregation of criteria is performed using a MCDA, multi-criteria decision analysis tool, which is elect-a-tree method. It is an outranking approach. I will not go a lot in detail, but I will present the general principle of this method. The general principle is that for each criteria, we compare the object, that is the hazard of the pair, and taking into account different thresholds, indifference and preference threshold. And we also take into account the weight of the criteria. This is a decision of the manager to set some weight relating to criteria, and that introduce the relative importance of the different criteria for the manager. After that, different indices are calculated, introduced in an algorithm, and that produce the ranks. Slide. Just to precise about the weighting of the criteria, so the tool allows to put some weight on the criteria. It is the risk manager decision to choose the relative importance of some criteria, but in our tool, as an illustration, we propose a different set of weights. For example, here for the criteria related to the hazard, the biological hazard ranking, we have the first set of criteria, the set A, that correspond to a situation that we have equivalent weight between severity and incidence. The second set of weight, the weight B, correspond to a situation that we give more importance to mortality in comparison with morbidity and incidence. And the last set of weight, the weight C, correspond to a situation that we make the severity really more important than the incidence. Just to show some application of our risk ranking tool. So our approach was applied to rank the foodborne biological hazard in France. You can see in the slide the link for the publication that was published in July. So you can see also the right side, the general ranking for an example of set of weights with an equivalence between the mortality superior to the disability and to the incidence. Here you can see that for this ranking, the first hazard is Salmonella, and after that we have a block of hazards. So the tool allows to make some equivalence. So when we have a block of hazard, like here we have Campylobacter, Staph Listeria, and Hepatitis viris, that means that the rank of this hazard are equivalent, and that is permitted by the tool. Next slide, please. We have also another example for the ranking of food biological hazard pairs with the raw meal cheese. Here you can see the results for different set of weights, and also the impact of the weight in the ranking. In this figure, the first 5 hazard food is not impacted by the weight, but we have some hazard that could be impacted, some couples that could be impacted by the weight that was set in the tool. Here we have the approach that was also applied for the ranking for the chemical hazard. As an example, only for the proof of concept, the ranking was made for 3 populations: adults, children from 3 to 17, and children under 3. And you can see here that the ranking of chemical hazard can be very different depending on the population, especially when you compare adults and children under 3. Also, the same illustration will also apply to the food chemical hazard pairs. Right, please. Yes, to conclude, so we have developed an original risk ranking method for hazard and food hazard pairs, first as a proof and concept, and we make a first application on biological hazard. This is an extensive work to especially to inventory, to select relevant hazard, and also to classify the food hazard pairs in the three categories: excluded, potential, and relevant. The data collection to inform all the criteria need is very time consuming, is very extensive. Our approach also consider data uncertainty and the risk manager preference, in particular by the weighting of criteria. And we are actually currently working on the full risk ranking of chemical hazard and also the ranking of chemical and biological hazard in bovine meats. And this work will be published in few weeks, hopefully. Thank you for your attention.